I bet you're watching this because somebody has ghosted you. This idea that somebody has rejected, ignored, or just turned the other way, and all of a sudden they disappeared and they're not part of your life. Or maybe that you thought that they would do something and then they simply just don't do it. So, one of the things, I'm a professor in business, and one of the things that you do learn is that it's very much part of the career that we are in terms of academic life, that there is a lot of ghosting that goes on. I'm going to help you deal with ghosting, and I'm going to draw analogies with my own experience, my own careers, and then as well tell you a little bit of a story, and then hopefully walk you through what it actually means or how to deal with ghosting that happens in your life, whether that this is something to do with your own relationships or your career or any particular area. So this idea of ghosting, first of all, I want to sort of share what I think it actually is. Maybe it's not the right way to think about it, but it's this idea that people simply just reject you, and it's subtle in terms of how it happens. Is all of a sudden they're just not part of your life. You're like, hey, what happened to that person? I thought that they were supposed to do something, or I thought that they were going to come back and I just have not heard from that particular person. Or, my gosh, this is a lot more difficult than I thought it was going to be because everybody keeps saying no to me. All of those things are very much about ghosting that happens. All of a sudden, they're just gone. They're not there, right? And this is a very important part of at least, my experiences. Maybe it is not everybody's experiences, but it's at least my experiences within the academic life as being a professor. But it's also really important in terms of your life too, if you're watching this, right? This is something that is very deeply perplexing. And it hurts a lot when this actually happens, right? You feel things of, I feel things like shame. I feel things of deep rejection. I feel things of, am I not good enough? I feel humiliated. I feel a lot of these negative emotions that are associated with belongingness, right? Like you actually want to belong and you want to be liked. That is a pretty normal reaction. I think wanting to be part of other people's lives is a pretty normal reaction in terms of how to deal with things. But there's this like weird norm violation that happens that somebody simply doesn't reciprocate, right? Like we have these norms in society where we do things for other people, and sometimes that they're very explicit, and sometimes they're just kind of like implicit, that we expect this behavior to come back to you, so you do them, and then all of a sudden they disappear, and you're like, wait, what happened? Hello. So this happens all the time. There's this great movie, and it happens all the time in the academic game. There's this great movie. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It came out during, the whole COVID thing. And so it's this movie called Don't Look Up. And I think Leonardo DiCaprio's in it. And there's this like scene, and I remember it vividly because I'm at a state institution. It's a really good state institution. But there is very much this order that happens within the academic game where there's, people that are at, la-di-da institutions. People would look at my institution and say it's la-di-da as well from other places. But there was a scene where, this scientist discovered this thing, that this comet was flying towards the Earth, and they were at a state institution. And he was like, come on, talk to me. This is really important. He's trying to contact everybody, and nobody paid attention to this particular person. And he's like setting the alarms. He's like, come on, this is happening. And then in the movie, 6 weeks later, somebody comes to him and says, hey, did you discover this thing? We actually had information from somebody from so-and-so university that is very elite, that we should pay attention to it. And he's just like, you could just see the like disbelief of the ghosting that happens that's inside of this poor scientist's heart, this poor researcher's heart. It was like, I've been telling you this for like 6 weeks and nobody has been listening to me because I've been saying this. And they were like, oh, we had it confirmed by so-and-so at this elite university and it's true. So now we want to talk to you. I'm like, this, when I watched it, I almost burst out laughing because this is our life in academia. I remember like moments in the past where I would say something and, people would look at me, certain people I would be like, this is the way that's going on. And people would look at me and they'd be like, I'm going to go ask somebody else. That is more important. That, this happens so much, this sort of rejection, this like blank stare that you get, and then somebody goes and asks somebody else is more important. This is part of the life that I live in. This is part of my world, right? Whether it's being done on email, whether most likely it's very, very implicit. I don't even see because you don't get those opportunities. What ends up happening is that other people get the opportunities before you ever get them, right? So that means that they go reach out to so-and-so far more, right? So they're going to get, if you were to think of a distribution of opportunities of being able to do something, right? So, and there's only 100 opportunities that exist, people that are at the very elite, right? They would get maybe 80% of the opportunities and everybody else would get 20, right? Because people are going there. This is a well-known phenomenon. It's well studied. I've said it many times before. It's called the Matthew effect. And people are really, really starting to take a look at this in terms of the distribution of opportunities and what people actually get access to in the scientific and research community. We know that this is very, very true across the board in terms of what happens. So, you might be going through the same thing in your own relationships, right? Maybe you're dating at this moment and you were like texting somebody and communicating and it was all going really well and you're like super excited and they just kind of like flaked out, right? And then they disappeared, right? That's the way I call it in my family, or we call it in our families. They just flake out and they just disappear and you're like, what the heck? Or maybe in your work life, maybe you are working with somebody and all of a sudden they just stop showing up and they're just not part of your life anymore. And you're like, what, like, what happened, right? All of a sudden you just weren't showing up. So a lot of this, when you go through these experiences, you kind of really take it to heart. You're like, is it me? Am I the problem? Right? There's that meme that goes around. And you're really, really taking it into heart. And you're like, I am, and you internalize it so much. So that's where I'm going to stop right here. And this is where I want to hopefully walk you through in terms of how at least I deal with this. It's never going to go easy, right? Like none of this is fun. It's a horrible experience. All of a sudden you're like, what happened? That just disappeared. And this is where you have to develop this very tough skin outside where you just have this like, screw you to the rest of the world. I know that is like that is really tough, right? To say that. It's very tough for me because I'm like a kind person deep down inside. And that's where I want you to sort of think about is how am I going to live a healthy and kind and generous life without others eroding that generosity and making you feel terrible inside and really eating away on who you actually are, right? And that's where you want to keep that real, like almost imagine in your brain as like, okay, I'm really kind, generous, and this is this very strong bound here that we are not going to go down. And if somebody does that to you, remember, it's always on them, right? Like you actually were trying to be kind and generous and a wonderful person, and that they did that on you, right? And so that's where you need to say, hey, it's not me. I'm actually doing the thing that I'm supposed to be, and I'm being kind and generous and a wonderful soul. It's them that are dealing with something. And that's the thing that's really tough, right? Because so at least in my head, I personify somebody that is like, like they're trying to get you. And they are, right? They're acting very strategically. They know exactly what they're doing. They're very, very well aware of what's going on. This is not like an implicit thing. But you also have to remember they come from different backgrounds often. And maybe they were taught that they have to act strategically. And maybe they were taught that the only way that they have to get away ahead is by doing this certain path. And this happens a lot in business schools, by the way. We teach students to act very strategically. And I want to barf most of the times when I hear this kind of stuff, because it's like not real human behavior. And it's behavior that you don't want in your life. And you're going to burn people. And it's not going to work out in the long run. And it's taken me years to have the confidence to be able to say this in a business school, right? Like, of treat people like real human beings that are kind and generous and wonderful to the best of your ability, and smile through all of this stuff. So that's where I want you to begin, is to think about, how can I be super healthy? When that happens, shrug it off as best of your ability and get back up and get going and say, this is on them. Somebody hasn't taught them how to manage their feelings very well, right? Like, this goes back to, when they were 5 years old, something happened to them either in kindergarten, and nobody walks them through, right? We're all a bunch of kindergartners at heart, and some of us have been able to manage some of these things. Or B, maybe they actually do have, genetic traits, and there's real genetic traits that where people don't sense these kind of cues, right? They really just don't. It's not part of their life. And I'm actually a bigger believer, as I've grown older, I'm a bigger believer in sort of genetic things that are going on, that we're just not well aware of them, right? So instead of viewing people as this amorphous blob, start thinking of them as like a whole big mix of all of these things that are going on in their heart. And that there are a bunch of individuals, and some of them are not so great, and they're going to let a lot of people down. And what you're going to notice is that a lot of these people have repeated patterns in their life, right? This goes for maybe in the work life and at home. Even though that we have these different separations, you start seeing these repeated patterns that happen where, you just have to be well aware that, hey, they have a repeated pattern of letting people down. And particularly if you start seeing things where, that there are some traits that we're aware of that really play out, right? So one of the traits, for example, that I'm thinking out of, allows people to be very, very personable at the beginning if they're acting strategically, and they want to get ahead. They're going to be very, very lovely to you because they know that they can get ahead. And then after that, they're going to abandon you once they have sort of utilized this resource and then gone on to something else, right? They have sort of expended you for exactly what they were trying to get out of you. So instead of thinking about it's your problem, if you're being a generous, kind human being and you're being wonderful, and then somebody ghosts you and just kind of disappears into their life, and you're like left hanging, and you're like, what the hell? Right? It happens all of the time in academic life. Put it on them. Put it like, hey, they're not dealing with something at this moment. And then come back to, I'm going to try to be a kind and generous and wonderful human being every single day as best of my ability. And I'm going to compartmentalize this, like, you're just not dealing with things as best as we possibly can in the circumstance. And this is the thing that I want you to realize. It's not you. And there's nothing that you could do. Often, there's nothing you could do to fix a lot of that stuff. They have to be willing to fix it, right? Like that's like rule number one in therapy. You have to be willing to fix yourself, right? And if you're not willing to fix those things and you can't see it, then so be it. And you just kind of walk away. And then you have that, at least for me, I have this sort of longingness for like, what the hell happened to that, right? But compartmentalize it and leave it as like, that's it. I'm not going to go there. I did the best I could. I was a wonderful human being, the best I possibly can. And hopefully you don't go about of ghosting people yourself, right? Like try to be generous and explain to people why you might not want to be part of their life anymore. In very polite terms. I'm not like, go burn bridges and all that kind of stuff. Just say, hey, there's other things that have come up and I love being part of what you're actually doing, but there's something else that's gone on. And it's going to hurt when you get that. If somebody does that to you, but then you just simply go about of saying, I'm a kind and generous and wonderful human being, and I'm going to keep going. And I'm going to love myself no matter what happens. And it's going to be surprising how much this matters of just framing yourself as being empathetic, being kind, being wonderful to the best of your ability. It's going to matter so much to you. All right. Hopefully this helped you out. Go out and be just wonderful people. And that's it. All right. Take care. Have a wonderful day. Bye.